Hello and welcome to episode 169 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I am one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I am the father of a very special lady, the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry, and we are coming off of a Mount St. Julio eruption. Finally, like Mount Vesuvius going off, like Mount St. Helens showing activity, like Mount Fuji reaching high into the sky. Julio put 12, 253, 2 on the Bucks. And people somewhat saw this coming too, right? Like I know Al talked a lot about Julio on our 3-man pod last week. I ended up leading leverage with Julio. He ended up 25% owned in the Millie Maker, the third highest owned player, but only 27% owned in the big $25 single entry double up on DK. Which was surprising to me, considering that he was the cheapest he'd been since 2014 at 7,700, considering he was at home where his splits were better, considering he was facing the defense, which allows the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers, no pass rush for the Bucks, imploding corners, etc. I mean, Julio was already fourth in the NFL in targets inside the 10-yard line, was at 10 targets per game over the last month. Yada, yada, yada. So it was somewhat surprising to me that Julio was so low owned in cash. But regardless, when a dude goes off for 53.8 points and he's 20-something% owned in GPPs, you obviously have to have him to win any money. So that was obviously one theme of the week. I thought another theme of week 12 was like guys can get better, right? So, Robbie Anderson, #team preseason, was deemed by many to be just not good enough. Not good enough to be a factor even after Quincy Enunwa went down in August. Wrong. Dude's a baller. Been doing it ever since the preseason a couple years ago. People, wanted to write off Joe Mixon after 10 games as someone who couldn't be a fantasy factor. Even with Jeremy Hill on injured reserve, even with Gio Bernard barely even touching the ball, even in a home game as an 8-point favorite at 4,400. I mean, Joe Mixon was only 12% owned in the Millie Maker and 11% owned in that big $25 double up. And I got a lot of questions about Mixon. I think one factor is, the Browns have a good run defense in theory, right, on paper. But when your offense and your play calling, your coaches just continually put you in such bad positions, it leads to good game scripts for opposing running backs. And so Joe Mixon was a guy who, as I mentioned, no Jeremy Hill, Gio Bernard barely touching the football. We could project 15 to 20 touches for Joe Mixon, hopefully a lot of short fields because of DeShone Kizer and the Browns' ineptitude. And hopefully Joe Mixon can just get better, So that's kind of a theme of the week. And also guys can regress back towards their means, back towards their expectation. Everybody was like, Alex Smith made a turnaround after the first month. Alex Smith is a new quarterback. This is a new offense. Oh, really? Alex Smith is 33 years old in his 13th NFL season. Did we really think that all of a sudden he was going to be some explosive vertical thrower for a whole year? Guys in their 13th NFL season don't typically change their stripes. Oh, they said that the Patriots defense was the worst in NFL history back in September and October. Well, they haven't allowed more than 17 points in a game since week 4. And another guy comes to mind, Jared Goff. I was in that group too. I thought Jared Goff was in trouble based on the way he played last year. But he was in a true rookie with Jeff Fisher with no weapons whatsoever. Then they go out, they get him Robert Woods, they get him Sean McVay, they get him Sammy Watkins. And next thing you know, Jared Goff, is #good. So, I'm trying not to go too overboard on player performance. Rex Burkhead went from 30% owned 2 weeks ago against the Raiders to 3% owned in an even better matchup, you could say, at home against the Dolphins. So again, I really consider people to always look at usage over production. It is extremely, extremely, extremely hard to evaluate talent. The people who are paid millions of dollars to evaluate talent at the NFL level are wrong so often. Who are we to try to evaluate talent? So by looking at usage, By looking at historical baselines, large sample baselines, I think we can do better than trying to say Joe Mixon sucks or Robbie Anderson sucks. I'm not playing him. You know, we're going to have a case of that this week. Alvin Kamara is awesome. I mean, you look at any type of number like per touch metric, eye test, anything. Dude is unbelievable. He is now 8,400, the highest salaried running back on the week for week 13. And he's touching the ball, 13, 14 times a game. It's just really hard to pay off that salary, to continually make big plays at the NFL level, to break 70-yard runs at the NFL level. So at 8,400, that's just a big pill to try to swallow. Tyreek Hill was in the 7K range for a while. He was getting like 6 to 8 targets a game at most from Alex Smith. Chris Thompson was barely playing, getting touching the ball way less than Alvin Kamara. You could only project like 9, 10 touches, 11 touches for Chris Thompson. He was in the 6,500 range. And if we are going to evaluate players for their talent level, make sure we leave room for them to improve, especially when they're young. I mean, think about Mixon, Robbie Anderson. I think Jacoby Brissett has improved a lot. Chris Hogan, Orleans Darkwa, Nelson Aguilar, Paul Richardson. All these guys can get better. So that's something I'm always trying to think about before writing off of a guy. Let's move to the 4-man and cash games for week 12. So in week 11, I won 14% of my head-to-heads. I got dead last in the 4-man, was just a total disaster. This week, week 12, I had my best week ever. Played 217 head-to-heads on DraftKings and won 217 head-to-heads on DraftKings. First time in 4 years of playing seriously that I've ever had a total clean sweep. So look, like there's an incredible amount of ups and downs while grinding through the course of an NFL season. Just like for real NFL teams, for us too, just an incredible amount of ups and downs. And you can see it just in my last 2 weeks. I think it's really important to never get too high and never get too low. And I know that's super cliche, but it's really true. Like, I'm not an idiot, terrible moron like some people called me after my lineup in week 11. And I'm not like God's gift to fantasy or some genius because I swept in week 12. Like most things in life, the real answer is somewhere in between. And my wife always says to me, like, oh, Adam, you never get excited about anything. When's the last time you were really excited, Adam? And that's true, and probably to a fault. I never really get excited about anything. But I also never get down about anything, which I think has really helped us. I got some questions from people about results on the full scope of the season for me. And, like in the interest of thinking of DFS as one like big, long game instead of the weekly micro view, I really don't mind sharing results ever. And I also am never opposed to sharing results because I think it's important that the general public understands realistic ROIs and realistic win rates. Like so many people are like, oh, I'll just sign up for DK and I'll start printing money. Or, people are like, oh, I saw that screenshot on Twitter. That guy must be up a zillion. Well, actually, probably not. And I'll get more into that later. But anyways, so my ROI for NFL head-to-head is at 18.04%, and I think somewhere in that 10 to 20% range is a realistic goal for head-to-head. Obviously, I've made a bunch of mistakes this year where I think I could have pushed that number higher, but my opponents have had a ton of hashtag regrets, I'm sure, as well. So yeah, I think, like people think that quote unquote pros are out there, winning 100% of head-to-heads and never losing. It's just not true. Again, I think anywhere from 10 to 20% is a realistic goal for somebody grinding hard. Anyways, back to the lineup. I never wavered playing off Julio, never wavered off playing Tevin Coleman, never wavered off playing Cooper Kupp. Obviously, Tevin Coleman with Devontae Freeman out. Cooper Kupp felt better about his floor than Sammy Watkins, given the way they've been used this year and with Robert Woods out and all of the corners out, both starting corners out for the Saints. I thought Cooper Kupp was a lock. Definitely wanted Todd Gurley as well, but couldn't make it work at 8,800. So my next priority was Brandon Cooks in that really good matchup against the Dolphins. And I I actually like Delaney Walker more than Jack Doyle, but I couldn't find the 500. Delaney Walker was on the wrong side of touchdown variance, but had been seeing at least as many targets as Jack Doyle and had the better matchup Delaney Walker did. So I didn't get to Delaney, but he ended up scoring the exact same as Doyle. At quarterback, I thought Russ was pretty clearly the best play, but considering I usually like to pay down a quarterback, I definitely considered Jacoby Brissett, definitely considered Marcus Mariota, but definitely considered Matt Ryan. But Russ was only, quote unquote, only 1,600 more than Brissett, only 700 more than Mariota, only 600 more than Ryan, and like at these quarterback positions, the outcomes are pretty narrow. But now the salaries are pretty narrow too, right? Like we don't have Russ at 8,500 and Brissett at 54. That clearly would have been a Brissett play for me. When guys are so tight together, the cheapest viable play is 5K and the most expensive viable play is 7K. Well, we have better decisions to make. The last two spots were kind of my big decision. And most of Sunday morning, I had Devontae Booker and Eagles defense in. At the end, I started thinking about the floors of Booker versus Mixon. First of all, the matchup was better for Booker, but he was sharing with CJ Anderson and Jamal Charles. He had this awful quarterback situation. The offense could just completely fail with Paxton Lynch, very possible. And then, they were on the road. Joe Mixon was at home. Many more scoring opportunities projected for Bengals, expected the Bengals to play well. And no Jeremy Hill, as I mentioned, Gio Bernard barely playing, and only 700 more. So I sacrificed the Eagles to get down to Falcons defense, got up from Booker to Mixon. That 2v2 was only a 12-point difference, 12.2 point difference. But yeah, it looks really cool to be like, hey, I was on Mixon in cash. So that was great. I got some questions from people like, did you put this lineup in GPPs? So it scored 198.92 points. I had hashtag regrets because I didn't really put it in any even mid-stakes GPPs. But I really don't have regrets now. Like there was no correlation in the lineup. In fact, there was bad correlation with the Falcons guys. Corey Davis was arguably bad chalk, which I certainly thought about before lock. I knew Julio and Kupp and Coleman and Doyle would be massively owned. And you know what? In the end, like 198.92 wouldn't have even really won anything in cash, right? Like it would have gotten 23rd place in the power sweep. That's the $150 three max that I'm just absolutely buried in this year. So I would have like 10x'd in that, but whatever. If I put my cash lineup into the power sweep every week this year, I'd definitely be down. Quickly, as for the four-man, I had a variation of my cash lineup in there where I went down to Brissett from Russ and up to Gurley from Cooks, had the Eagles Booker side instead of Falcons Mixon. So that lineup was like 40 points off or something, but it was still enough to take down the four-man. So pants off sex, duck treats, Jerry Love, et cetera, et cetera. Standings in the four-man are Pete 5 wins, myself 5 wins, Al 2, listeners Bupkis. It is getting tight as we go down the stretch between me and Peter, and also tight for the listeners to get a win. Let's move to GPPs and the Listener League for Week 12. It was a 3,000 entry, filled very late, close to lock on Sunday morning. Be sure to get in nice and early for Week 13. You go to DK Playbook. You find the logo for this podcast. Once you find the logo for this podcast, you will get to the landing page. There you will see videos, a bunch of cut-ups of me talking on this podcast and Al and Pete, and then the whole videos. And you'll also see a link to the Week 13 Listener League. Goes up usually on Thursdays. Winning the Week 12 Listener League was Herbleton. He had Goff at 8%, Sammy Watkins 17%, brought it back with Alvin Kamara 15%, Julio and Delaney as chalk. And then he went off the board a little bit with Rex Burkhead, as I mentioned, 5.6%. Devin Funchess was really low owned considering no Curtis Samuel. Kelvin Benjamin obviously gone 5%. Devin Funchess and Joe Mixon, as we've talked about a bunch, 8%. So congrats to Herbleton. We'll see you in the Week 13 four-man. In second place was D. Cunningham 015. Josh McCown at 0.2% in a home game against the Panthers. Robbie Anderson, hashtag team preseason, 1.8%. Devin Funchess as part of that game stack. And Christian McCaffrey as part of that game stack. So a really low-owned game stack in that Jets-Panthers game. But certainly some interesting plays and underpriced players that were certainly viable. As chalk, he played Julio, D.D. Westbrook. And then Gronk, he got a 10.2%, Rob Gronkowski. Miami's been so bad against tight ends. We knew after Gronk failed at high ownership last week, he'd be low owned this week in week 12. So congrats, like that lineup from D Cunningham 015. And in third place is M1T3W. I went with almost a full Rams Saints game stack. Goff, Watkins, Kupp, Kamara. Played Tevin, Julio, and Eagles D and DD as chalk. And then went way off the board at tight end with Charles Clay. Didn't work out, but Charles Clay was an interesting play given how thin kind of the wideout core is for the Bills. No Kelvin Benjamin, Jordan Matthews banged up, et cetera, et cetera. In 1,949th place was my best GPP team, or at least my best one that was in this listener league, which I had 3 entries in. Did not cash. I was just a total disaster in GPPs once again this week. At this point, I actually don't think I'm running bad in GPPs. I just think I am bad. Pretty frustrating, but whatever. I had Brissett, T.Y. Hilton, DeMarco Murray for my stack, Julio, Dede, Doug Baldwin, and Jared Cook. Quite frankly, not even worth discussing. Just, a terrible lineup and terrible team and whatever. This was the best one that I put in the listener league, so you can imagine how bad the other were too. All right, let's move to everybody's favorite portion of the program. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. Question 1 is from Jamie Paulskill. He says, after the bird carcass is consumed and dessert done, what's the appropriate amount of time to hang for family time at the in-laws? And how do you politely suggest it's time to go without making it an issue? You can't, right? You just can't suggest to leave. It's really not an option at the in-laws. At least it's not for me because I'm such a horrible son-in-law. I'm literally never around. During NFL season, I have this off the board job that's impossible to explain to the other yentas in the neighborhood. I'm just a debacle, right? But generally speaking, I always like to suggest a restaurant in these situations over in-home dining. And obviously it's not an option for bird carcass day. I get that. But there are so many benefits to going to a restaurant. First of all, you can order what you want, right? There's no need to choke some mutton down or hide it in the pillows. There's no need to pretend this thick carcass in the shape of the actual animal is appetizing. You don't have to explain to people why you're not eating the anal stuffing, right? If you go to a restaurant, you get a good meal, you get what you actually want. But I think more importantly, in these tough in-law spots, etc., the restaurant provides a beginning and an end. And I think people kind of miss this concept a lot, right? It's hey, we're going to meet at the restaurant at 7. Cool, that's the beginning. Now you're on the restaurant's clock. You're no longer on your own clock. You get seated. You get drinks. You get food. You get dessert. You get the check. You leave. There's no loitering, right? The meal is over. And that provides a natural endpoint where you can part ways comfortably and go home to your respective beautiful beast. I can't emphasize that enough. Start and end points in these kind of situations are so important. Built-in start and end points. Question 2 is from Amp Mullins. Do you re-listen to DFS pods from early in the week for plays you were on early? People say your first thought is usually best. Yeah, I've heard that saying, that cliche, and I actually don't believe it. Why would my initial thoughts before all the research is done, before all the injury news is out, before I have all the information, why would that be best? I actually think my best decisions come on Saturdays when I have all the information available to me. It's all on my desk, it's all in my brain, and I just get to clearly think about things. So, first instincts, etc., don't really mean too much to me in a game of partial information. I'm just trying to make decisions with the most information possible. And a lot of weeks that leads to decisions being made close to lock. So like tinkering for the sake of tinkering, you know, after you've already have all the information, I think can be bad. But while you're still processing information, you know, like I was processing the Joe Mixon situation versus Devontae Booker up until 12:45 Eastern on Sunday. Question 3 is from Matt Diamant. He says, still overwhelmed with a 6-month-old. Need some hot takes to share with the wife as to why being an only child is awesome. Well, Matt, you have come to the right place, my friend. Let me help you with kind of a 4-point plan for your argument here. And I think the first point and most important is what's best for your first kid. And you have to think about that honestly. It's really easy. And a lot of people will say it's great to grow up with a sibling. And maybe it is. But for me, as an only child, like my parents had the time, and I think more importantly, the energy to be like all over me. Oh, Adam got a B instead of an A. Let's call the teacher. You know, Adam's curfew is midnight and it's 12:15. We're going to look for him. You know, and by the way, that actually happened. Like it was like 12:15 and I'm like smoking cigs or something with like, I don't know, doing something stupid, you know, with my friends in like the woods. And I see like these headlights and it's my dad. He like found me because I was 15 minutes after curfew. Now, can you imagine having like 2, 3, 4 kids and having the energy to do that? Like you're so exhausted. You're like, oh, 2 kids are okay. You know, one is in the woods smoking cigs, big deal. Right. But instead, my parents were able to be all over me and kind of keep me on the right path. Every little thing that went on with me growing up, like my parents were on me to make sure I was doing the right thing. And while that was very, very, very annoying at the time, I think in the end, it was a good thing. I think point 2 you can make is like, what's best for your personal relationship, like your relationship with yourself and your relationship with your spouse. So right now, one of the best things that we can do, having one kid, is tag team. And what I mean by that is you can be like, hey, I'm going to do X. Can you watch Ben? I'm going to Miami to run a 1-mile race. You okay to be with him by yourself for a few days? And the other way too, my wife is like, hey, you know, she needs a break. Me and Ben go do something by ourselves. You know, we go kick the soccer ball or go to a museum or whatever. With 2 kids, it's not really an option for me to leave my wife with an infant and a toddler. Literally impossible. Like I just have too much guilt to do that. So, you know, now we're in a spot where when I need a break, when she needs a break, just plan on paying someone. I mean, paying a babysitter, paying nanny, paying whatever. Like it is what it is. So I think that's a point to make. Point 3 would be financial. I think I'd already be retired if it wasn't for kids, you know, childcare, college, need for a bigger house, need to move to a place with a good school system, et cetera. You know, like that's actually a you know, kind of a point off this is like, I love living in the city. Like we live right downtown. I think there's like an amazing energy in the city, restaurants. I love being able to walk everywhere. I love living in the city, but like staying here through high school is not really an option because of the school system. So now we have to kind of downgrade our life to the suburbs. You know, maybe if we only had 1 kid, we'd send them to private school in the city or something like that. But I'm not paying for 2 kids to go to private school. So yeah, from the financial perspective, like I'm not going to go too deep into this, should be pretty obvious. And question 4 is end time / aging curves. Or I'm not question 4, I'm sorry. Point 4 is end times / aging curves. So I think a lot about aging curves. And I know we've talked about it on here before. It's kind of a great irony that our prime years, when like we hopefully have money and peak health, are also our child raising years, right? And like that doesn't really mesh. Like I should be out climbing Mount Kilimanjaro right now, but I can't just leave my 8-month pregnant wife and 3-year-old son to go to Africa for 3 weeks, right? That's just like out of the question. So by having just 1 kid, you shave your responsibility years down by a lot. And like you can do some of the things that you want to do that simply aren't possible later in life. You know, when you get to your 50s or 60s, when the aging curve starts to really come down, you're not climbing Mount Kilimanjaro when you're 65. Yeah, so I could keep going all day here. I know I don't want to go too long here, but I hope that helps, Matt, and good luck to you. Question 4 is from Adam WX21. He says, for those with a small bankroll, what is the best way to build your bankroll so you can play all the plays you want and not miss on plays? Yeah, I suspect that you're thinking about DFS the wrong way. Our goal is not to play all the plays we want in a week. It's to narrow the pool down to the best plays and then make the strong lineup constructions too. So it's not just picking players, it's also making strong lineup constructions. I think trying to cover every square in a week, even in small slates, is a mistake that people make a ton. It just doesn't work. There are way too many combos. So for people on a small bankroll, I'd encourage you to just play smaller stakes, but play them like you'd play a normal roll or a big roll. It doesn't really matter how big your roll is. There is $1 head-to-heads. There is the quarter arcade. There is $1 single entry. You can play all those stakes and just play it like you would if you had a big roll. It doesn't really matter. Question 5 is from Adam Rose. I recently noticed some back hair beginning to form on my upper back. The last thing I want is to end up looking like that guy from the basketball scene in Along Came Polly. What is the GTO move in this spot? Yeah, look, man, it happens to the best of us. I think the real issue comes in when everything connects. So the hair on your big toe connects through your foot. You kind of get that small trail of hair on your foot, up through your ankle, up through the leg, through the pubic region, into the belly, onto the chest, connects with the back as we go over the shoulders, and then to the bottom of your real hairline, your rear hairline, that is connecting to the protruding back hair, creating a seamless transition. Okay? Just one big coat of hair all connected. That is when we have a real problem. Honestly, I'm not sure what the GTO move is here. You can get someone to shave the back of your neck / shoulder blades, but you really need to do it like every few days. Otherwise, you could end up with stubble, which is just a total disaster. So I don't know what to tell you, man. There's really no good option here outside of daily grooming / waxing / stuff I'm just not doing. Question 6 is from RHA33. He says, do you ever play the pick'em slates on DK? I have not regularly, but I have messed around with it some. And I actually think it's a pretty cool idea. I've messed around with it some in NBA too. Obviously, the most optimal way to play is just to use a projection system and simply pick the player in each tier who has the highest raw projection for DK points, period. But a lot of times, there will be players with very similar projections in the same tier, perhaps only a point or two off. And that's where we can start thinking about ownership levels in GPPs. If one guy is going to be massively more owned than the other, but he's only 1 point ahead in projections, then obviously the other guy is the play. And also, for football too, we can think about correlations, make sure we have stacks, make sure we have game stacks or whatever we want to do across tiers, even if the projection doesn't tell us that. Question 7 is from A Snipes 3. He says, how important is it for touts to be transparent? They all talk a big game, but a lot don't have the screenshots to prove it. Yeah, so first of all, I really hate the word tout, right? When I think of that word, I think of some cheap salesman, in Two for the Money, aka the worst movie of all time. He's like, here are the 5-star locks of the week. Oh, just pay me. Oh, here are those 5-star locks lost. Here's the 20-star lock of the year. Just give me $300. And I think that you guys listening to this and the vast majority of people out there are smart enough to see through that kind of crap. I'd also be very careful about getting lured into thinking that people are good because they are on team hashtag screenshots on Twitter, right? Unless they're posting them every single day, you have no clue what their year-long ROI is. It could be a winner, but I think there's a pretty direct correlation between the number of screenshots people post and the amount lost. So again, as I've said a million times, you should be investing your time and money, if you desire to invest money, in information and tools, not picks. And let me say that again, it's so important. You should be investing your time and money in information and tools, not picks, never picks. You just can't consistently win like that. So then the question comes in, if you're just looking for the best information, not these bullshit picks, how important is transparency, right? Evan gives these unbelievable amount of information every week, the best information every week to us. Do you really care if he's winning or not? And by the way, I know Evan is winning, but it really doesn't matter to me anyways. I think the point of the content industry should be to help people with not a lot of time, get up to speed quickly. I do all this research. I do all this work all week. then I present the information to you guys in articles, podcasts, Twitter, whatever, where you can do with it what you will. Like I would hate telling someone who to play. And yeah, I'm always willing to be transparent, totally transparent about my results, because like I really don't care. I don't really see much downside to it. And because, as I've said before, like it's important that people understand realistic win rates, realistic ROIs. So, like, just don't be fooled. Like, to me, a tout is someone who's like, hey, give me $100 and you'll win 90% of the time on DraftKings. Like, come on, we're smarter than buying into that. Question 8 is from great friend of the show, works with me. Follow him on Twitter at JustinBailey32. He says, when combining married life and finances, do you think the optimal setup is separate accounts, all in one, or a combination of the two? I am a huge, huge believer in separate accounts. And we've maintained that. I've been with my wife since like 2005. We maintained separate accounts the whole time. For me, it's all about maintaining a level of independence, like a level of freedom, which has been like super important to me my entire life. Like I'm not explaining to my wife what this charge to Coinbase is, or why I have a Hyundai on a 1 mile race, or what these transactions to DK are. Like I'm just not. And she's not explaining to me, some ridiculous $500 purse or some new shoes or the 20th outfit for our son that he'll outgrow in a month. Like I really see no benefits whatsoever to a joint account. Now, the key to making this work, though, very important here, you have to be the one bringing in the bacon. Like you, in order to make this fly with most women, like you have to pay all the bills. Everyone, you have to pay the babysitter. You pay for dinner. You pay for delivery out of your account. You pay daycare. Everything comes out of your account. Her money is mostly whatever she wants to do with it, spending money. Then there's no questions asked. It's smooth sailing. It's a beautiful thing. This is probably not the best marital advice, I admit, but it works for me. It works for us. And I think it's the GTO move. Question 9 is from Aaron Watkins Jr. He says, this year I've been waiting until my research is done and primary lineup is made before listening to any pods/reading articles. And this has been my most profitable year. Viable strategy, coincidence, or something else? I think this is a great, great idea, especially if you have time to do all the research you want. You won't be swayed by public opinion, which will naturally make you more contrarian, and usually that'll be good. And also, like, I think it's simply more rewarding and more fun to do your own work and see how it plays out. And then you can kind of read articles, listen to pods if you want to maybe mix in some other ideas that you related to that you heard. But, I think the issue is, this is a great idea for everybody, right? Do all your own research, make all your own lineups. I think the issue is, and I kind of answered this in the question a couple before, is like people don't have time. People don't have time. People have lives and jobs and kids and friends and blah, blah, blah to do all the research they want. So that's why a lot of people start with articles and pods and go from there. And I totally understand that. Question 10 is from Vina Penny. He says, I expect you never took a dump in your high school bathroom. What was your process behind that? And was there ever a time you just had to? Great question. So like most high schools, the situation in my high school's bathrooms was a complete disaster, filthy, run down. But we actually had a unique situation where the school took the doors off of all the stalls. Everyone actually took the doors off the stalls. So absurd. And I guess it was because people were having intercourse or selling drugs. I don't really know. Not like my high school was bad at all, but whatever. So they took the doors off. So anyways, if you wanted to defecate in the toilet at school, you literally had to do it in front of everyone in the bathroom, no doors. So I wrote for my high school newspaper, and I think it was like my junior year, I had an op-ed column, and it was kind of similar to this podcast, but obviously way tamer. I was like 16, so 20 years ago, which is crazy to think about. So anyways, I had this column. So when the school instituted this policy, I wrote my column just like absolutely ripping the school to shreds for instituting this policy. I talked about like how humiliating and ridiculous it was that we couldn't even have privacy when taking a dump. And this was really like the first time I realized the power of the press and media. I had people that I didn't even know at school coming up to me and being like, oh, great column, man. That was awesome. Yada, yada, yada. Everyone loved it. And before long, the school put the doors back on. And, probably not because of the article or whatever, probably just because so many people were complaining. But whatever, I'll take credit. But anyways, I'll always remember that. Back to the question, though. So anytime you're in like a familiar place, you should be aware of where the good bathrooms are. And I think most people are, everywhere in life, like in Seinfeld, when George can immediately tell you all the best bathrooms on every block in New York City. There were some really good, like I mentioned, there were some bad bathrooms. There are also some good bathrooms at school, frequently ones that are off the beaten path. And that's really what you got to look for. I use the basketball locker room one a lot. The one you got to walk all the way to the gym, under the gym. Rarely was there ever anybody in there. There was also one by the teacher's lounge, which was always cleaner. The janitors probably paid more attention to that one. But yeah, ideally in a lot of these situations, you just hold it until after school. And if you can't hold it, you just go home. No really great options. Like many things in adolescence, not a lot of great options. That's just the way it goes. All right, we'll be back late Thursday night with the Week 13 game-by-game breakdown. You can send Q&A questions anytime to @TheDFSEdge on Twitter. For Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.